Hello, everybody. This is Rob Fredette with the podcast HODGEPOD, and we're talking the 1985 World Series. I have a great guest on my podcast episode. Marshall Garvey is the author of the book about the 1985 World Series entitled Interstate 85, the Royals, the Cardinals, and the Show Me World Series. And also, you could also call the I-70 series between the KC Royals and the St. Louis Cardinals. And Marshall Garvey, welcome to my podcast. And I cannot wait to talk 85 World Series.
Oh, well, first off, thank you so much for having me. And likewise, so excited. I've talked about this book in the 85 World Series on a lot of podcasts. It makes for a really exciting and unique discussion, unlike any other. The 85 World Series is just so underrated. It's always been, I think, overlooked and mostly just remembered for Denkinger's call. But as we'll unravel in this episode, there was so much more to it.
Yes, absolutely. So I like to have my guests introduce themselves. If you can, give a brief introduction, and we'll start about the 85 World Series and some other facets as well.
Of course, my name is Marshall Garvey. I live in the Sacramento area, specifically Citrus Heights. I've been a writer for more than 2 decades. I have 3 published books. The first one is a self-published book called The Hidden History of Sacramento Baseball. And the second is a novel about the Korean War called Elwood's Odyssey, which I co-authored with my friend Doug Weaver. And the third is, of course, Interstate 85. I write about a wide variety of subjects, including baseball, history, video games, music, movies, and a whole lot more. I am especially passionate about World Series history. I consider myself, baseball historian through and through, but the history of the World Series in particular is what really grabs me. And ultimately, I gravitated toward this one specifically, and it's made for quite an adventure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about this, but World Series, I think, really captivate the country when you have a 7-game series. Some game series end in 4 or 5 games, but it's the 7-game series. Each game has its own chapter, and it's like, you can't believe like some of the stuff that happens. I'm going to preface this. I'm a Red Sox fan, and I still hurt after the 1986 World Series, after we've won now 4 now. And then I worked the 1997 World Series with the Marlins in the business I was in, between the Marlins and the Indians. So I know the atmosphere and just the utter excitement of a World Series. But the 1985 World Series, when you reached out to me, I wanted to do some research, and I remember that series. So talk about Kansas City Royals and St. Louis Cardinals. And just real quick, the Cardinals went 101-61 in 85 regular season, and Kansas City went 91-71. But what makes this series, just before we get in the devil in the details, what makes this series really special?
What makes this series special, well, is just like you said, the devil in the details. It's this series with just lots of like little details and overlooked stories and moments that the more you dive into them, the more compelling the story of the series gets. It's First off, it's fascinating because of its provincialism. Of course, it was the All Missouri series, the I-70 series, named after Interstate 70, which has connected Kansas City and St. Louis either partially or completely since 1956. And so that, and there's a big rivalry between the cities of Kansas City and St. Louis. So there was that element baked into it. It's also just the fact that it's a World Series that has a different legacy than most. Usually with a World Series, there's the legacy and aftermath for the winner and the legacy and aftermath for the loser. But 85 is unique in that it basically shaped 3 legacies. It was the Royals, the Cardinals, and then, of course, Don Denkinger. So the 85 series, it has a lot of great on-field moments, of course, including Denkinger's call. But what I found is that ultimately it just had a lot more. It had an impact off the field in the decades to come that was just really riveting to me. So I love it for that.
Yeah, and one thing about the World Series is you'll find players who are utility players become heroes. You have the superstars in the World Series. In this series, it was George Brett, Hal McRae, Frank White, Willie Wilson, Brett Saberhagen, a pitcher, Danny Jackson, Bud Black, and then for the Cardinals, the one and only Ozzie Smith, Jack Clark, Tom Herr, Vince Coleman, Willie McGee, just to name a few, John Tudor, Bob Forsch, and Joaquin Andujar. Now, when I was getting ready for this, all these names came back to me. I remember collecting baseball cards and having baseball cards and having them situated by team. But it's great when you look back I love the nostalgia looking back at the names and the players and the games.
Absolutely. You just touched on another thing I love about 85. I like to call it the ultimate wax pack or baseball card series. These are names that are just like you hadn't thought about them in years or decades. And then they're just like, oh, yeah, I remember that guy. I remember Dane Orge and Steve Farr or Danny Cox, or Todd Worrell. Just, obviously there's the big names like there's Brett, Gubazaw, Smith, Van Slyke, but just all these like really great overlooked, gritty players that were all present for this World Series. It was a great collection of talent. Yeah, it's great nostalgia.
Hey, when you have all these players there, one name I totally forgot, Buddy Biancalana. I love that name. That was a great name. But talk about the book. So you wrote this book, and you had to interview players for it. So I'm always fascinated, like when you interview people. You have a common person I've had on my podcast, Clayton Truder, and he had interviews galore for Boston Ball and also Loserville. So what's it like getting those interviews and approaching the players and Don Denkinger? What's that like? Because you may have gotten some rejections, but in the whole scheme of things, you got quite a few players, right?
So about that, I only actually got four outright rejections. Willie Wilson, John Sherholtz, Jamie Quirk, and Mike Jorgensen. They were all cool about it. And while I love all those guys, none of those was like, oh no, I didn't get it. The project's screwed. Whereas like I got 27 people to talk, 26 by phone and one by email. Approaching them and getting them every single one was so incredible. It was so exciting, especially because I had spent a lot of time developing the book during quarantine in 2020.
Mhm.
And then to start seeking these guys out, finding out where they were all these decades later. It's kind of like that book by Brad Bellucci on the Wax Pack. It's like, the games were a long time ago. Where is everyone? So when I started connecting with these guys, whether it was through social media or finding an email or approaching family members and networking to them, it was great. I mean, it could be nerve wracking for sure. So these are some huge names, and I'd get the jitters before probably every interview. But every single person was great. I mean that literally. All 27 were a blast to talk to, and everyone. What you'll see when you read the book, especially, everyone spoke candidly. No one gave me like a boring interview of like boilerplate quotes, like this and that, and gamers and great group of guys. And it was just like they all spoke really passionately about what that series means to them. So yeah, the experience of all 27 of those, it was the perfect group of interviews. I wouldn't trade that in for anything.
That's amazing. So, what's it like? Was it like for some of the players, maybe on the losing side, was it cathartic to talk about the loss of the World Series? Did they feel to this day that they should have won the series? What was your feeling when you were interviewing some of the Cardinals?
Now interviewing the Cardinals, so I interviewed seven of them. Their feelings about being on the losing side were interestingly nuanced. You are right. Some of them said that Ricky Horton, relief pitcher, he was the first Cardinal I talked to. He said, we should have won that series even with the Denkinger call. And he's absolutely right about that. And others went in a gamut. Like I talked to Kurt Kepshire, a starting pitcher for the Cardinals left off the playoff roster. He poured his heart out to me. And 85 Hansen, but not because he's mad at Denkinger or like Jack Clark and Daryl Porter dropping Balboni's pop up. He said he feels it's his fault. They should have won because he felt that if he had pitched game five, they would have clinched it there. Jeff Lottie, another relief pitcher, he got a ring with the 82 Cardinals, and then he was on the losing side in 85, but his career got cut short in 86. So
Mhm.
he told me, I'm just happy that I got to be there, both the winning side and the losing side. I wouldn't trade it in for anything. So the Cardinals weren't like bitter. They had an interesting range of reflections on 85.
That's amazing because I think when you watch any World Series, the emotion, especially when the teams that win, obviously it's unbelievable when you watch it. You're mesmerized by it, but it's the losing teams, like you see them on the bench and they're just looking at the celebration, and then some maybe have their hands down in their knees, and it's just the raw emotion. And the players are human. And it's even though they make a lot of money, and back then they probably did too, but it's human emotion. They wanted to win that series, and they probably they probably think about it every day, don't you think?
Oh, I'll bet. And I know that there's quite a few guys on the 85 team, including some I didn't get to interview, where I think it still runs really deep. I think Tom Herr especially takes it really hard. I think Willie McGee as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I described that. I'm so glad you emphasized that in the Game 7 chapter of the book. I described the way the Cardinals looked as they watched the Royals celebrate.
Hmm.
Like Danny Cox just like staring in disbelief at the camera, just like chewing a wad of tobacco. Cesar Cedeno's like sitting there. He's got like his fingers like this. Yeah, that raw Terry Pendleton standing there still gripping his bat like his at bat's gonna come. Yeah, that raw shock has got to be it's got to be something. I know it's tough for the Cardinals to come that close, even though they still had a great season, and I made that clear in the book. They should be remembered for that.
Yeah, so let's talk about the Royals because the Royals had a great lineup. George Brett, one of the greatest third basemen and obviously a Hall of Famer, but they had some other great players: Frank White, Willie Wilson, Lonnie Smith, Steve Alboni. I think he came over from the Yankees, if I remember correctly, in a trade, and Hal McCray was the DH. That was a pretty potent lineup for the Royals, and George Brett was the showcase. Did you interview George Brett?
Of course I did. Oh, I'm still like, I don't know if I'm ever going to come down to earth from talking to him. Interviewed him by phone while he was walking his dog near his mansion in Mission Hills. Yeah, I was, oh, yeah, George was great. George is, he's got a great sense of humor. He loves to drop F bombs. I can tell you won't interview George Brett without one or two F bombs at the minimum. Yeah, George was a great perspective. He had told a great story about giving Brett Saberhagen a really specific final hug after the final out of the '85 series. He was also really cool talking about for the last chapter when the Royals got good again in 2014 and 15 and how proud he was of that. So George's pride in being a Royal was one of my favorite things that came through when I talked to him.
Yeah, he was such a cool player. Just watching him, he had that I don't know, that aura about him on the field and at the plate. He tried to get to that 400. I think he batted 388 for his highest one season. I don't remember what season it was, but he was such a great player. And you know what? Like I was watching some of the World Series prior yesterday and today, and I love Al Michaels was doing play-by-play. Jim Palmer and Tim McCarver were doing color. They were awesome. Did you have a chance to listen to the play-by-play?
Oh my gosh. I'm so happy you just mentioned that specifically. No, I watched all 7 games. I watched all the broadcasts, especially like in depth. I would rewind to like, make sure I got certain moments
Yeah.
and details. I got to tell you, one of the reasons I had the time of my life writing this book is because of that trio of announcers. Palmer, Michaels, and McCarver were terrific during that series. Their chemistry was wonderful.
Yeah.
Even like the dumbest throwaway jokes were still just like made me smile. And it's actually funny. There's kind of there's a small subplot. I talked about it in chapter 5. Howard Cosell was actually supposed to be in that announcing group, but he had published his infamous book, I Never Played the Game, in September of '85 and lost the position because of it. And look, I respect Howard Cosell for like a lot of what he did, especially for boxing and football announcing. But I think that trio was so much better without him. Yeah, just more lively, fun, just loose. Yeah, Palmer, Michaels, and McCarver, great trio. Great job announcing.
Yeah, I remember listening to Al Michaels in the 1980 U.S. Olympics when they won the gold, and then he had some great calls in baseball in the 80s, and then when he did the NFL on Sunday night and all the other and ABC, ESPN, he just has a way with words about calling a game. And then you said McCarver and Palmer, they had the chemistry. Just listening to them, it was amazing just how they bounced off each other and didn't cut each other off.
Yep, exactly. They would let every line and little barb, breathe fully. Yeah, it was perfect chemistry.
So how long did it take you to actually write the book? You get the quotes, you get the interviews, you did your research. You had to probably look at newspaper clippings. You got your interviews. So how long did that take? And then when did you finally realize, okay, I got it done?
It took me 5 years. I conceived the book on April 15th, 2020, 1 month into quarantine, and it was published on March 27th, opening day of this year. So it's basically a 5-year journey. I actually put it on hiatus for a year in 2022 because I had to deal with things in life. That ended up being the best thing to happen to both me and the book. But I would say, honestly, I'll be honest, and I'm actually working on an article that will soon tell the story of what I went through writing this book. I actually nearly gave up on it during that hiatus in 2022. But then I restarted it in January of 2023 and started getting interviews again. And even though it wasn't finished officially at that moment, I just knew that I had a handle on it. Like I knew right then and there that it was gonna reach the finish line.
Mhm.
So yeah, it was quite a journey.
Yeah, you 27 people to interview. You get traction, and then you say, okay, now I'm getting the momentum, and all of a sudden now you got the book written. That is awesome. So when I look back at the series for the Royals in the championship series, the American League Championship Series, I like looking at the games and the wins and losses. They lost to Toronto games 1 and 2 in the ALCS, and then lost the first two games of the World Series. So there was two series where they had to come back down from 0-2.
Oh, 2, and then in both cases they went down 3-1.
Gosh.
And and here's the crazy thing. That was the first year that league championship series was best of 7. So they pulled off 2-3-1 comebacks in the first year that it could be done. And to this day, they're the only team to pull off 2-3-1 comebacks in the same series. That just boggles my mind. But the reason they were able to pull that off was their pitching. That starting rotation was just unbelievably great. So like even with a big deficit like that, Dick Hauser could just put in any pitcher and it would build the bridge to victory.
Yeah, when you think about it, that's remarkable. You're down 0-2, you're down 3-1 in both series, and you still come back. It's like a dream. It's like, how did we do that?
Oh, it's incredible. I've watched all the games and talked to all the guys. I know just about every play of both those series by heart. And even I'm just like, for real, how did you do that? It's pretty remarkable stuff.
Did any of the
It's
players
resilience that deserves a lot more credit. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, yet did the players talk about that at all? Being down in those series 0-2 and 3-1?
Absolutely. Yeah, they talked about it. And I talked to just about everyone about their key heroics, that sparked both comebacks. One one story in particular about the comeback in the World Series that really blew me away. He actually turned down my request for an interview, but I still read his book and other sources. Was Willie Wilson in Game 5 in St. Louis? He was like really defiant and like really optimistic. I heard from Jim Sundberg that the Royals clubhouse was actually kind of quiet and somewhat dour before that game. But Willie Wilson was just in high spirits, like, we're not going to lose tonight. And then he hit a huge triple early on to put the game out of reach and send the series back to Kansas City. So yeah, both through interviews and research, yeah, I got great stories on how each of those guys rose to the occasion to complete those comebacks. It's amazing.
Yeah, and when I was looking at the game of the 1985 World Series, Game 7 ended up being an anticlimactic game. KC won 11-0.
Yeah, let's let's be real, and you can see at the moment the broadcast starts, the Cardinals had completely checked out. They just did not respond well to the Denkinger call, and I think Whitey Herzog really like cemented that, like just being bitter about that. They were done. Lynn Jones, Royals backup outfielder, he told me when he looked across, and saw the Cardinals looks on their faces, he knew they were done. And yeah, they just melted down. John Tudor couldn't locate his changeup. The bullpen just got shredded.
Hmm.
Yeah, 11-0. It's one of the most lopsided game sevens ever. And it's one of the few game sevens between two 20-game winners, Brett Saberhagen and John Tudor. You think you're going to get a 1-0, like 11-inning classic, and it's 11-0. It just, yeah, not a glorious end for St. Louis.
Yeah, and the last three games of the World Series, KC outscored St. Louis 19-2. Games 5, 6, and 7. KC outscored St. Louis 19-2. So something, they were in a slump, but game 6 definitely really, that last inning really soured them. And then game 7, 11-0. So I want to talk about Brett Saberhagen, because I remember when he was 19 years old when he pitched. Was he 19 or 20?
In the 85 series, he was 21.
21, okay.
But he was at the time in 84, he was 20 and he was the youngest pitcher to start an LCS game at the time. But yeah, 21 years old. Here's a guy who's has this amazing Cy Young season. He pitched like a Hall of Famer. When Brett Saberhagen was at the top of his game, he was like Hall of Fame talent. And not only that, but while in the midst of his MVP performance in the World Series, he and his then wife Janine have their first child.
Mhm.
I can't even imagine that. You're only 21 and you're a World Series MVP and a new dad, within the span of 2 days. Yeah, Saberhagen he kind of like Dwight Gooden and Fernando Valenzuela from that era. you thought you were probably seeing a Hall of Famer. I don't think his whole career quite got to that level, but when he was at the top of his game, Saberhagen was as good as any.
Yeah, I forgot. I looked at his career. I forgot he pitched for the Red Sox. I was like, how did I miss that?
I know that.
I was like, how did I miss that? He had a 14 or 15 wins one of those years. So he had a great year for the Red Sox in the late 90s.
Yeah, exactly. But to be fair, I bet a lot of people forget that. And then, like, he was with the Rockies for their first playoff team in '95. I didn't know that. He still had some good moments later on in his career, but yeah, you obviously think mostly of him as a Royal.
So let's go to the 85 World Series now. So leading up to game 6, I had to, when I was getting ready for this, and I'm going to get your book as well, but Vince Coleman I remember there was an incident with the tar, right?
Yes, it's just before Game 4 of the NLCS uh, at Busch Stadium in St. Louis. Vince Coleman, he's just wrapped up in the moment. Like Andy Van Slyke told me, he was holding court. He just wasn't mindful of his surroundings. I think Coleman was like tossing like a glove into the Cardinal dugout specifically. There was a slight drizzle, so the stadium workers started to unfold this giant tarp, and Coleman got run over by it. It just started rolling over his leg. And Ozzie Smith and a bunch of teammates ran to the controller and said to turn it off, but it had to unspool back over his leg.
Oh,
So he's lucky that didn't crush him to death, but he had a bruised left ankle. So he missed the rest of the NLCS. Not that it hurt because Tito Landrum stepped in and just did fantastic. But then in the World Series, he had a bone chip. So it was confirmed no Coleman for the World Series. And that's like, in my opinion, that's the bigger what if than the Denkinger call. I feel like if Vince Coleman's there for that series, they can scratch maybe a few extra runs and really put it out of reach. So yeah, that's definitely an injury that haunts the Cardinals.
yeah, I remember Willie McGee and Vince Coleman. They were terror on the bases. I remember in the 85, it was just speed, speed, and speed. And they were just, they were terrorizing National League pitchers and other teams. And I remember they were just awesome. They were truly like the catalyst for that offense.
Absolutely. And that was what made the 85 Cardinals great. They weren't expected to do much, but Whitey Herzog had this vision of just speed begetting a strong offense. Obviously great defense and pitching. It was just called Whitey ball. It was a throwback style and it worked beautifully. Yeah, they tore up the base paths. So it was a really fun team. Watching those highlights of all those steals was a lot of fun during my research.
So let's get to game 6, because game 6 it's the one where the Cardinals can wrap it up in Kansas City. So we're at that point now. The Cardinals are 3 outs away, and then the call happens, and I watched it. And you look back at that call, and you look now. We're used to seeing instant replay, and it's like you watch Whitey Herzog just running back to the dugout and the players going back to their position, and there's no challenge or anything like that. You're like, challenge, challenge, challenge. And now you watch TV, you watch a game, and they'll spend 10 minutes on one play. So it would be really something if they would have had instant replay. They didn't, but that play definitely is the play that really signifies this World Series.
Absolutely. And it's one of the moments in my opinion that shapes baseball because it shows how even a blown call still stands in the record books. The play still happened. And yeah, at the time, and it now occurs to me, especially for younger fans, especially even younger than me, who are used to instant replay, it's like, yeah, they did not have it back then. So you have to keep that in mind when people want to, just unload on Denkinger. It's like you have to be like basically perfect back then. You don't have that safety net. Yeah, Denkinger, what he later said afterward was he got too close in his observation on the play. He saw it in two parts. He saw the ball going into Todd Worrell's glove, and he saw Royals hitter George Orta stepping on the bag, but he didn't hear the pop, pop, because the crowd was so loud. So he just called it in the order he saw it, safe. Televised replay made it clear, though, that was certainly not the case.
No. And I said, whoa, I watched it. I watched the play before we came on. I was like, my gosh, it's so far, 40 years ago, and you watch it again, it's like, oh man, they got robbed.
Yeah, I don't, my book obviously shows that there was more to the series than just the call. I don't think that that's the moment where the Cardinals lost it, but no one can deny. Denkinger himself certainly didn't. That was just a terrible call. It's really like there have been controversial calls that were super close, like Black Friday between the Dodgers and Phillies in the 77 NLCS. Like that's almost like a tie. But in this case, it's like by the time Ord is going all or nothing to reach for the bag, he's out. It's not close. So yeah, it's a rough one.
Yeah, the Cardinals after that play, it looks like they were just like rattled by it in some sense. After that, Steve Balboni came up and there was a play where he had a foul ball to the dugout and somehow they got crossed. Darrell Porter and Jack Clark got crossed as to who's going to catch it. When you look at the replay, and it was like you wonder if they had the bars on the dugout head, maybe they would have been able to sense, maybe they would have caught it instead of like flying into the dugout.
Yeah, and I watched that play and I talked to Steve Balboni about that moment, and I watched that play over and over and over. It's so odd because they are there more than in time, and it should be a routine play. But I think Darrell Porter miscommunicated specifically. I think he said to Clark, like, I've got it. And then all of a sudden he backed off on it. And by the time he did, the ball was sailing over Clark's head and he's kind of awkwardly reaches out. I think another factor was that Jack Clark had been an outfielder during his career with the Giants. And that season was his first real full season at first base. So there's probably like a little kink or two there. But that, in my opinion, that's where it really went off the rails. If the Cardinals get that out, I bet you they put the call behind them and they win that game. But letting that slip and then Balboni gets a base hit, yeah, that's when it changes.
It kind of like when one bad play begets another bad play, then things go off the rail because that inning ended pretty quick after that play, which was amazing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it just kept the rest of that inning was just a parade of more Royal heroics and Cardinal blunders. Like Porter miscommunicated with Todd Worrell on what pitch to throw to Hal McRae, and that got away and let the runners move up, so they had to walk McRae. And then it ends with this. This is one of the things I love about the 85 series, this specific bit. Who's the hero for the Royals? Dane Orge, guy who's had a terrible season. He told me in his interview like it was a rough year for him and he was close, to retirement. He'd only had one at bat in the series, flew out to end game one. He helped the Cardinals win the World Series in 82, so there's that rich element to it. And he just comes up confident as all get out that he's going to do it. And he hits a flawless hit to right to score Onyx Concepcion and Jim Sundberg. And I just think, perfect. Like, that's kind of the thing with the World Series. Those random heroes that can get it done. Gene Larkin for the 91 Twins. And
yeah, I was just about, yeah.
Yeah, just it's those random guys. Or Steve Pearce for your Red Sox in 2018.
Yeah.
It's like those randos. Like maybe they never do anything again, but for that one moment, they're the hero.
Yeah, I remember it was a Cody Ross for the Giants, had a great World Series. And then I remember Francisco Cabrera in the NLCS when Sid Bream slid into home. I thought he was going to be a superstar and never heard from him really ever again. Those players that are like utility guys you don't hear from, not the superstars. That's the legend. That's the great thing about playoff baseball.
Exactly. And I feel you don't really get that in other playoffs. You don't really get those fluke heroes. But in baseball, truly anyone can be the hero. And Dane Orge was the perfect random hero for that game. I love it.
What was it like when you were talking to him? Did he get excited when he was talking about the game-winning hit?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Dane's great. He's really charismatic. Yeah, he was really detailed, and I could hear the pride in his voice as he talked. He described like the way that he angled his bat, and he described his confidence. Like, I know I'm going to get a pitch to hit, and I'm not walking. I'm a pinch hitter. I'm not a pinch walker. That's what he said to me. And when he described how his hit managed to just not, it was so perfect that no one was able to get to it right away defensively. He kind of burst out laughing like, I'm just the lucky guy that hit was so well. I've been lucky my whole life. Babe Ruth, Little League, college, been lucky my whole career. I don't know what to tell you. Yeah, Dane was a real gem of an interview.
And it's amazing on that play there when Jim Sundberg slid into home head first. That play was pretty close.
It was, and this is and I so close because the throw. Andy Van Slyke, credit to Andy. I mean, he had a cannon of an arm. Van Slyke was still able to get to the ball quickly enough. And Van Slyke threw the ball so hard that he fell back onto the turf. That ball got to home before Sundberg. But the problem, I mean, respect to Darrell Porter, rest his soul, but that was a rough inning for him. I think the problem and what Van Slyke said to me is Porter was out too far off the plate. I think if he backs up the plate, he can get Sundberg in time. But because he had to reach around and Sundberg knew how to slide on the outside of the plate,
Yeah.
no getting him.
And he was a catcher too, right? Jim Sundberg. So he probably knew like where to slide, maybe where to keep away from the tag, which was really remarkable. I mean, that play, I watched it a couple times. That play, you're just waiting for the tag, but that's how close it was. It's just a game of inches.
Exactly. That's a good point. I never thought of it that way. Because he also had a clutch slide in game 5. It was kind of a mirror image, of a prelude to game 6, if you will. And Sundberg's like an aging catcher. He wasn't like, I don't think he was really known for base running like, say, John Waffen or Carlton Fisk was. But yeah, you're right. Because he's a catcher, he knows the dimensions of the plate. That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. He executed it perfectly.
Yeah, it was cool. I really liked that. I mean, this series really got me really psyched to talk about because kind of like brings back memories. Because I remember I was in college and I was watching it on TV when there was no cable. You'd see it on, I think it was on ABC. Yeah, ABC, I think it was. And it was really cool to watch. But one thing about Jack Clark, the NLCS, when he hit that home run against the Dodgers, I don't think I've ever seen it. I may be crazy, but when he hit that home run against the Dodgers off of Niedenfuhr, I've never seen a team come out in the top of the ninth and greet the guy at the plate. Have you ever seen that?
No, that was really unique to me because obviously in game 5, Ozzie Smith hit his miracle homer off the Edenfuhr, but that was a walk-off. So of course they're going to greet him. But I thought it was so funny. It's like the game's technically not over. It's a huge home, but that tells you how devastating that home run was. It's like you think of the visual of Dodgers left fielder Pedro Guerrero looking at the home run and then throwing his glove down on the grass in frustration.
Oh yeah.
It was such a huge, huge home run. Yeah, the way the Cardinals came out in mass, even though the game wasn't over, that really stood out to me. That tells you just how huge that was.
That was
Yeah,
amazing. I forgot all about that, but you never see that. And just everybody from the bench came out. It was remarkable. I
the
mean,
whole team.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if I've seen that before or since, but that's a great detail that I love about that moment.
I love Jack Clark's home run trot, man. That was the bomb. That was awesome. I love watching his home run trot. Man, he crushed that ball. That was just, man, oh man. And yeah, I forgot about Pedro Guerrero slamming his glove. I mean, that's the raw emotion right there.
Absolutely. And it was an emotional game too. The Cardinals are, they're down by a run. They're 1 out away from a game 7. Clark had actually been struck out after an intentional walk in the 7th. So there was vengeance for him and he really savored that. So that was, and the fact that happened the same day that the Royals clinched their pennant later was a perfect synergy. Yeah, the Royals and Cardinals, but both clinching their pennants with dramatic home runs or triples. I love it.
Yeah. When you were getting ready, when you were putting the book together, did you get any clippings of newspapers while you're doing your research about the anticipation of the Show Me series between KC and St. Louis? What it was like? What were the two cities? Were they rivalry? Because we've had the Subway Series between the Mets and the Yankees. We've never had the Angels or the Dodgers, and we've never had the White Sox and the Cubs. But this was like the first real rivalry, like in state. Some are in the same city, but this was the same state. What did you get any sense about maybe the rival, like the cities, like what it was like talking about it at that time?
Oh, absolutely. The whole state was alive for that series. It wasn't just Kansas City and St. Louis. Even the smallest, most poor rural towns in Missouri were living and dying with every pitch. Braggadocio, I'm not making this up. Braggadocio, an unincorporated farming community in the southern boot heel, they were watching every moment and just like all wearing Cardinal gear. Like towns that could barely afford a satellite dish or couldn't afford a satellite dish were listening on the radio. It was the anticipation and excitement throughout the state. There were so many great bits. One great example, the Governor John Ashcroft, the Missouri governor, he wore a hat, a two-billed hat called the St. Kansaloo City Cap. It was Royals on one end, Cardinals on the other. So wherever Governor Ashcroft went, he just flip it around and be like, "Hey, I'm for the Royals. Hey, I'm for the Cardinals." Like the the way that the way that it animated people across the state, like there are people who are loyal to the Cardinals for generations, others are more Royals. It was just, there was a frat house at University of Missouri that split down the middle. One guy's like, okay, everyone Royals, you're on this side. Everyone Cardinals, you're on that side. It just, yeah, I found so much great material about how the cities and the whole state got ready for it and how they just savored it the whole week of that World Series. It was a really great time in Missouri history.
Wow. Have you been to both St. Louis and Kansas City to see games?
I have been to Kansas City. I have been to two games there, including a game in May where they had a reunion of the '85 team. It was
Wow.
really special. I have not been to St. Louis yet, but it's next on my list. Like next time I'm in Missouri, I mean, unless it's a book promotion event, obviously. But
Absolutely.
I want to be in St. Louis and I want to catch a game at New Busch Stadium. Yeah, here it's just a great park, and St. Louis is a great baseball town. They know their ball.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I went to Kansas City a couple of years ago, and I loved it. They had the Hall of Fame out there in the center field, and we went there, and it brought back memories. George Brett, Freddie Patek, Willie Wilson, all those guys, Dick Hauser. It's a great Hall of Fame there, and we sat up in the upper deck facing out, and I was mesmerized by the highway, the freeway there, the cars going. You can actually hear the cars.
I love that. That's one of the things I
Awesome.
love. Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, and because it's located away from downtown, and I know the Royals are looking for a new stadium. That's a whole other subject we have to get into. But like, yeah, they want to go downtown. But like, I love how unique that is. You savor the sight and sounds of Interstate 70, and just how exciting that is. And it's a beautiful stadium, and
Oh
it's got a
yeah.
great view. If they were to stay at Kauffman, I would honestly be in favor of that.
It's a beautiful stadium. I actually videotaped just hearing the cars during the game. You could actually hear the freeway when you're in the upper deck, which is quite remarkable. I went there with a former boss of mine who I worked with in Miami at the World Series, and he lives in Kansas City, and we met there. It was pretty awesome. I really enjoyed it. It was a blast. And yeah, I always like looking at stadiums like where KC is, though, like great plays, like seeing where this stuff happens, or Dodger Stadium where Kirk Gibson hit the home run. I love the nostalgia part of. And speaking of nostalgia, Joe Buck had a great call when Ozzie Smith hit the home run. Go crazy, folks! Go crazy!
Oh, that's such a great call. Yeah, that was on KMOX on the radio. And it occurred to me, it didn't really occur to me. Like, I've known about that play for years. That's Ozzie Smith's signature moment. But, if you were watching it on TV, you heard Vince Scully and Joe Garagiola. But if you're listening on the radio, you heard that. Go crazy, folks. Go crazy. And so in retrospect, there's no other way to imagine that moment but with Jack Buck. I love the way Buck's voice just gets so animated. Like Smith corks one into right down the line. It may go. And he like pauses and it bounces off the facade. And then the go crazy line was just perfect. I mean, especially because you would not expect Ozzie Smith to hit a home run in that moment. Like Andy Van Slyke said to me, he said, I'd pick a 40-year-old Tubby Usher to hit a home run before Ozzie Smith. So,
I think I said Joe Buck. I meant Jack Buck. So excuse
Jack
me.
Buck,
I had to
no
correct.
worries.
I had to
But
correct
yeah,
it. So,
uh,
yeah,
but
but
yeah, go crazy. It's yeah, I go into detail on that in chapter 4. Classic.
and then he also had that great call when Kirby Puckett in Game 6. We'll see you tomorrow night. I
We'll
love
see you tomorrow night. And
That's
then
just like
Gibson
it's
in
awesome.
88. Right, Kirk Gibson 88. I don't believe what I just saw.
Yeah.
And it's fitting you bring that up because I think today I was seeing on Twitter. I think today would be Jack Buck's 101st birthday.
Wow.
So yeah, he had an amazing ability. Whether it was the Cardinals or it didn't involve them at all, to just like elevate a moment. Yeah, Jack Buck was great.
Yeah, speaking back to Game 6 where the Royals won when Al Michaels when they won the game in Game 6, one thing that I noticed was they didn't say anything. Nobody said. They just let the crowd set the tone, set the picture, which I thought was remarkable because sometimes some broadcasters will like to be in the moment. Just let the crowd do it, and that was great. They didn't say anything, and it was awesome.
I agree. It's so beautiful because his voice escalates so much on the hit. Like, that's a looper hit in the right. Here comes Concepcion. Here comes Sundberg.
Yeah.
We go to a 7th. Like, he lets it all out in an enthusiastic way. And you're right. He just stops. And then you just savor the images of the Royals mobbing each other. And then eventually the replays, including that shot of Dane Orge seeing the winning run score and like fist pumping in the air and it freezes. Like, I agree. The way Michaels just fell back and let that, like you said, paint a picture was brilliant. Less is more announcing.
Yes, and we're getting nostalgic here. I love the Kirk Gibson call by Vince Scully. She is gone. I love that. She is. That's just awesome. And then Al Michaels had that call in '86 when Henderson hit that home run against Donnie Moore. This one's for the ages, folks. Just real simple, and it just to this day is still iconic. Those calls.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're timeless.
So let's talk about also anything else about the World Series that really like stood out to you when you were getting your research and talking to the players, because this is the 40th anniversary. So what were like maybe a couple of stories that really like you think about like, oh my God, I can't believe that he said that or this was that. What was that like?
Well, there's quite a few great examples. One that stands out to me, and this is an important point in the book. We talk all about Denkinger's missed call in game 6. That wasn't the first missed call in that game. In the bottom of the 4th inning, Frank White got on base and he attempted to steal second and he was called out. However, the ABC announcers had a second guess and they watched the replay and it turned out he was safe. And if he had been called safe, he would have scored on the hit by Pat Sheridan after that. And the Royals would have gone up 1-0 and it's a different game. And I talked to Frank about that. He was my last interview for the book. And Frank told me like he knew he was safe and he was really mad, but he knew that there was no instant replay, so he couldn't challenge it. And he told me he didn't want to risk getting ejected in an elimination game. So when I discovered that and talked to Frank about it specifically, that was really eye opening. There were a lot of others too. And also just some fun little tidbits like Mark Gubazon, Steve Farr, 2 great pitchers for the Royals. They pitched in the ALCS. They were heroes. They didn't get to pitch in the World Series. So during game 7, during that blowout, they called Dick Hauser, Royals manager, from the bullpen, and they were like, could you just let us pinch run? We just want to get it on the action, you know? There was a betting pool during game 7. The Royals had a betting pool on who would catch the final out. Daryl Motley caught it, but no one seemed to pay. George Brett finally paid his share this past reunion. But yeah, there's so many. There's lots of like really emotional stories, revelatory, and also just fun behind the scenes stuff. And every time a player or someone else told me those stories, it was just like, oh, I'll give you one more. Royals bat boy Chris Brown. I interviewed him. He's an executive in baseball now, but he was a bat boy at the time. He got to keep Joaquin Andujar's Game 7 jacket. Buddy Bates, the Cardinals equipment manager, told him he could keep it. And Chris Brown was like, no, the Royals don't let us keep the stuff we handle. And Buddy Bates just said, keep it, kid. Andujar's not going to be here next year. And then Andujar got traded that offseason. And Chris still has that jacket. He sent me photos of that jacket mounted on his wall. So stuff like that, little slice of life stories like that are what make the 85 series so great.
You know, we're talking, you said Joaquin Andujar. My brain's starting to percolate now from when I was a kid collecting baseball cards and watching baseball. Joaquin Andujar, he was on the pitching staff with J.R. Richard in Houston, if I remember correctly. And then I remember Frank White and George Brett, they were on those teams in the 70s that played the Yankees as well, if I remember correctly. Were they not?
Oh, they were there the whole era. Yeah. Well, because George Brett and Frank White started in 73. That's also when Hal McRae came over by trade. So Hal McRae, George Brett, Frank White, they lived through all of those playoff series, the tough losses to the Yankees. So getting over the hump in 85 was that much sweeter for them.
Boy, 73 to 85, that's 12 years. My goodness.
Well, and they even played longer after that, right? And the first playoff for the Royals was 76. So they were there the whole playoff era. That's why.
Yes, I know. I remember they played the Yankees a couple of times in the 70s and lost. I remember Freddie Patek crying in the dugout. I remember that image. That was awful. I felt so bad for him.
That's one of the saddest baseball images I can think of. It's emblazoned in my mind. Yeah, Patek just like slumped over in the dugout all by himself. Crushes me every time I see it.
Let's talk about World Series. This is a great series. Unfortunately, the 86 World Series is considered probably one of the greatest, even though the Red Sox lost. But the Red Sox were up 2-0 also in that series against the Mets in 1986. And they just could not get it done. They were one strike away. But let's talk about some other World Series as well, because there's a lot of great ones that probably don't get remembered or given recognition.
Absolutely. Other underrated World Series, like I always think of the absolute best World Series are like 1991 Twins and Braves, 75 Red Sox and Reds, 86 Mets and Red Sox, 2001 Diamondbacks and Yankees, 2016 Cubs and Indians. It's like 1924 Senators and Giants. Like off the top of my head, and there's others too. Those are like the absolute best. But yeah, 85 is one of those series that just gets overlooked. I think 1980, also with the Royals, where they lost to the Phillies, I think that's kind of an underrated one.
Mhm.
There was a lot of late inning action in those games. It doesn't really get talked about as much.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, there's quite a few underrated series. There are even quite a few 7 game series that don't seem to get talked about as much as time goes on. Yeah, what are there some certain series you feel are underrated?
Yeah, I think I worked the 97 World Series, and I thought that was a good one because the Marlins they won in 7 games, but they were a team that was put together with a lot of free agents and trades, and they were only in their 5th season, so they won in their 5th season. I thought that was a really eye-opening for an expansion team. And I also think maybe like the Phillies when they beat the Royals, I thought that was, they had all Mike Schmidt, Pete Rose, all those all-stars on that team. But
Mhm.
the big red machine, yes, 75 against my Red Sox. Again, I remember watching that one. Red Sox could have had that, but those were true great series. And one thing that's really remarkable is Fred Lynn was the Rookie of the Year and the AL MVP, which is a mind-boggling stat award.
Oh, absolutely. Like how it's so rare that that happens. That fact has always blown me away. Yeah, Fred Lynn got both of those honors in that year. Yeah, I agree. 97 gets a bit underrated. That's a great game 7. Walk-off hit by Edgar Renteria. They had to tie it up in the ninth. And that's especially urgent because the Indians still haven't won it. Guardians, Cleveland haven't won it since 48. Yeah, 1980, like I said, a lot of great dramatics. Plus, that was a World Series that gives you your ultimate superstar showdown: George Brett and Mike Schmidt. The 2 greatest third basemen in baseball history facing each other in the World Series.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I think the 2001 World Series was probably top 3 because the nation was healing with 9/11, and just that series, each home team won their games. Anticlimactic game 6, they won 15-2. And then game 7 is Luis Gonzalez's hit, which was just remarkable. Unbelievable.
And that was my first year as a baseball fan. That wasn't the first World Series that I remember, but it's the first one I watched like truly dialed into baseball. And what a series. Yeah, that's as good as it gets.
Yeah, because I remember the Yankees, they won some heroic games at Yankee Stadium, and just the energy, I mean, with what happened at 9/11 was just remarkable. And just that Arizona crowd in games 6 and 7, I have never heard a crowd that loud ever. I mean, on television. I don't know if you have, but that was the loudest crowd I've ever heard for a World Series.
Oh yeah. No, it was deafening. It was amazing energy.
Yeah. One thing about the 97 World Series when I was working on the food side, but prior to game 1, they opened up the whole stadium of Pro Player Stadium at the time. So I walked up to center field and you could not see the outfielders with the obstructed view. That's how people just wanted to be there. It was like 65, 66,000 people for each game.
Oh yeah. That's another thing about 97. I tend to forget that because like I said, there are pro player stadiums built more for the Dolphins and like football capacity. Having that many fans and adding that much more noise. That
It was loud. It was loud. It was remarkable. Where can you get your book, Marshall? Because we've talked quite a bit about it. The book is entitled Interstate 85: The Royals, the Cardinals, and the Show Me World Series. Where can you get your book, and how the sales been going?
So sales have been going good. I am especially good as of late because I've been pushing really hard to get a paperback edition locked in as soon as possible. And as soon as paperback is official, then I'm going to focus on getting the audiobook. So it's a big push right now. You can get this book anywhere. You can get it through Amazon. You can get it through Barnes and Noble. You can get it through any major bookseller, whatever you prefer. You can get it directly from my publisher, University of Missouri Press. Yeah, just get wherever you are, get your copy today. If you want it signed, we can work on an arrangement. I'll even eat the cost of mailing it back to and from if you need that. But yeah, definitely get this book today and help with the push for paperback. This book it's gotten a lot of great reviews. People have really been enjoying it, and people are really beginning to see just how special 85 always was. It didn't get the love it deserved, but now on the 40th anniversary, people are seeing these stories anew. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for everyone who's read it, who will read it, and I'm always grateful to talk about it on a great podcast like this. This has been a terrific talk.
Yeah, it has been. Get back to game 7. You had John Tudor against Brett Saberhagen. And John Tudor was a 20-game winner in 85, as was Brett Saberhagen. And Saberhagen pitched 2 complete games in the World Series, which is remarkable. And 2 shutouts, too, right?
He gave up 1 run in game 3, but I mean, that's unbelievable. And this is another thing I love about 85. It's a benchmark of classic starting pitching. A bunch of the games in that series were complete games. Yes, Saberhagen throwing 2 complete games. Maybe today you'd be 7 at most, and then he comes out because of the third time through the lineup. No, Saberhagen just cruised through those 2 games, especially game 7. Amazing.
Yeah. John Tudor, he got roughed up a little bit. 2 1/3 innings, 3 hits, 5 runs. Like you said, he won games 1 and 4, but lost 7. Still a great pitcher. I remember when he pitched for the Red Sox prior to going to St. Louis. He was with Bruce Hurst. I remember them coming up in the early 80s. So I just love the nostalgic part. I think people will really resonate to your book as well, because people love nostalgia, whether it's in music, watching movies, and just reading about their heroes in sports or anything. But I think what this book is really going to, which it has, and I'm going to get a copy, is, people love nostalgia, don't they?
Absolutely. And 85 is a super sweet spot for nostalgia. I even touched on this in the book's intro. So much great music, movies, TV, arts, culture, all happened that year. And I think that this series, like you said, it's nostalgic for people on a baseball level and takes them back to a special time. So yeah, definitely, especially with the book's very cover, which evokes 80s baseball cards. People are going to have a nostalgic blast reading it. It's fun.
Well, as you were talking here about the 80s, you look at 84, you had the Tigers, 85 Royals, 86 Mets, 87 Twins, 88 Dodgers, 89 it was Oakland, and 1990 it was Cincinnati. It's amazing that there were no repeat. Why wouldn't they come back the next year and do well? It really boggles the mind. How can you get back to that pinnacle?
It's amazing because there were so many of those champions looked like surefire dynasties. The Tigers, the Mets, the A's, Cardinals too. Those were behemoth teams. You think they win at least one more, but the only team with multiple titles was the Dodgers, 81 and 88. But those were different eras in Dodger history. Overall, yeah, it's really fascinating how the turnover was just so constant. So many teams that season looked like they would get another, or maybe be 3. But yeah, the 80s just interesting how it just kept changing one year to the next. No dynasty.
Yeah, I remember when Jack Clark hit that home run, Mike Scioscia was the catcher for the Dodgers. He was a great manager for the Angels. It's really remarkable when you look back, when you see him play and you see the manager when they managed, or their first base coaches. It's pretty remarkable. First of all, Marshall Garvey, I want to thank you very much for jumping on my podcast. Again, the book is about the 1985 World Series. It's titled Interstate 85, the Royals, the Cardinals, and the Show Me World Series. And Marshall, I'm really honored that you came on, talk to me about this. I really, really enjoyed having you on.
Oh, likewise. I'm grateful you had me on, and I really appreciate your research and the specificity of it. This made for a really deep discussion that 85 is always warranted. I had an absolute blast talking, and I hope all your listeners enjoyed as well.